Hey, evening. Thanks very much for coming. Very happy to have you here. Just before we start, I'd love to get a sense of who I'm talking to. So, are you working? Are you students? Should we start with that? Show of hands for working. Okay. And how many of you working in kind of advertising or communications or something related to that? And how many of you have strategy or planning or something like that in your title? Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit about strategy and account planning, but I don't think of it as something that is only something that should be done by planners or strategists. I think it's something that if you're in the business of communication, however you're involved, there needs to be a bit of strategy and planning. So whether or not you're doing it specifically, hopefully there'll be some things that are interesting in here. And the way that evening is going to work is I'm going to start talking a bit, and I'm going to talk for a little bit about my background, because I think it's always helpful when you're working to see how other people have got to where they are and to be reassured that it's very, very rarely in a structured, planned way, and it's normally just the result of coincidence and opportunity and disasters. That tends to be the way that it works. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my feeling about what makes good planning and what makes good strategy. And then we've got a couple of other people in the room who are going to speak after me. So that's how that's going to work. And we might have a break as well. We'll see. So we'll start off by just talking about me, because that's a good start. And I went to college here, which is a lovely English university. Looks a bit like Harry Potter, full of people in gowns. Very, very traditional college. And until I left college, I'd never thought about getting a job. And the kind of jobs that people there did was either carry on being a professor or an academic, or go into things like finance or politics or law. So it was kind of quite conformist. And I had no idea what I wanted to do when I left, but what I did know is that I didn't want to go and live home with my parents. So I needed to get a job. I ended up in an ad agency to start with, and it was quite a change because I'd spent 3 years here doing English literature, completely useless if you want to get a proper job. Good if you want to be a professor, but apart from that, doesn't really have much application, or so I thought. And I've been studying everything from Chaucer to Beowulf to restoration plays and all of that stuff that has absolutely no relation to the modern world at all. So I was quite ill-equipped to be doing anything useful. Anyway, I ended up in an ad agency, and this is the first brand I worked on. You may or may not have heard of it. It's a sausage stick, and it comes in a little wrapper. And I'll show you a bit of work just to show the quality of work that was going on.
Is that like British for beef jerky?
Sorry?
Sorry.
No, please, come on, let's make it a discussion. What do you like?
Because I'm learning new words. So, sausage stick, you said, is that like a British term for beef jerky?
It's a bit like a beef jerky, yes, exactly. It's like a dried piece of... Oh. Let's watch that again in case you didn't understand the, anything that was going on at all. And on full screen it is so much better. So the premise here was that he was a very aggressive sausage who, even while you were eating him, still had a bunch of attitude. And this came out at a time when lad culture in the UK was fully kind of formed. I don't know if you've heard of it. This was way back in the 90s. And this was a time when men were trying to reclaim their masculinity because women had basically emasculated them. And bands like Oasis and Blur were being very laddish, and there was a magazine called Loaded, and its title here, which you can't see, was For Men Who Should Know Better. And it was all about celebration of things like beer and sexism and just being really inappropriate. So it was a great time to be a young man in London. And what I learned from Pepperami is that, you know, advertising could be part of culture, and that was kind of interesting to me, and it felt fun. And then the second thing was that I had nothing to do with that commercial. It had been made by the time I got there, but it won loads of awards. It won an award for kind of creative planning, and it won an award for effectiveness. So not only did it make good advertising, but it sold lots of sausage or jerky for the American audience here. And one of the interesting things here, and I don't know if you can read it from here, but This paper explores how the agency conducted semiotic analysis to determine consumers' quirky relationship with the brand. And this was surprising to me because I'd spent 3 years doing kind of English and critical theory and all of that, and had done semiotics, and suddenly it felt that all of this academic stuff might have some relation to the job that I'd kind of ended up doing. And the other thing I learned is that at that time you had to be quite smart to make really stupid stuff. So that felt like fun. The next job I got was working with IKEA, and we created this ridiculous character called Vandenpoot. There might be some consistency here, these imaginary, slightly ridiculous characters. And his whole thing was that he hated IKEA because things were cheap and he was a pretentious designer. So we had lots and lots of fun with him, including one of the most effective opening campaigns for IKEA that was so effective that they had to close it down because everyone started fighting. Really, really good advertising. There was a riot and, as you can see, unforeseen volume of customers. They didn't know how effective Vandenpoot was going to be. Then I moved to China, and in China I had the privilege of working with Converse at a time when they were trying to figure out what the brand was doing there, and they had a lot of relationships with bands, with music, with fashion, and so I ended up on a tour bus with 2 Chinese bands touring around China, and we captured everything on film, and they played gigs in different cities, and rather than making advertising, we were kind of documenting what it meant to be young and in a rock band in China. This was actually the first time a coach or a road trip had happened for rock. Normally they just got on an airplane and went city to city. They hadn't really got the idea of road trip culture. So that was great, and that was a completely different set of skills and set of outputs. And then before I moved here, I was in Portland, and I was working for an agency called Wyden Kennedy, and I was doing a little bit of advertising, but I was mainly kind of experimenting with other things. And one of the things that I was helping to do was run an incubator, so a tech space for small companies to come and try and build their business. And that was great for me because it taught me, again, a different set of skills about what it takes to be an entrepreneur with a dream, but no money and no idea about whether or not their dream will come true. On the right here, you can see some things that we were doing with Nike, which was working with developers to see how Xbox Kinect technology, so motion capture technology, could help designers design athletic clothing. So that was, again, very interesting. And then I ended up here, which is also very interesting. And one of the other nice things about this journey was that all the way through there were these kind of side effects. So I was involved in youth culture a lot in the UK because I was planning for Pepper Army, the spicy stick, and then ended up working on Levi's and IKEA. So I was really getting into what contemporary culture was like, and I ended up doing exhibitions and writing a book and doing some photography. When I moved to China, I did a kind of installation, did an art exhibition about kind of Chinese youth. And again, none of this was stuff that I'd had in my head, but it all kind of fell out of the job and some of the things that I was doing at that time. And I think the point about all of this is that I've ended up in LA, and I never planned to be here at all. And each time I moved, it was a very short, opportunistic move. And I probably worked in about 8 or 9 jobs, different companies, and really each time I saw an opportunity and went for it, and never really had a kind of 20-year plan. So as a start, I don't know where you are in your careers, but quite often it feels completely unstable. One piece of news, it will probably continue to feel completely unstable, but that's kind of okay. So that's my background. What I thought I'd talk about are some important relationships that as strategists we should be developing. And also these kind of really define the things that we're doing in our job and why it's kind of fascinating and also very difficult. The first and probably most important is the linking of business and creativity. So the situation that we're in here is that we have to work with clients who have very kind of clear sales goals. So they're trying to increase the number of people who buy toilet paper, or they're trying to get people to pay more for a certain object. But they're very clear and they're very, I suppose, functional, if you like. And then on the other end here, we believe that by making creative stories about their business, it will be a more effective way of doing what they're trying to do. But here, we have a bunch of people who want to make films using octopuses or animations using a crazy director. And the job of the planner quite often is to try and figure out how these two worlds fit together. So they need to do something that's going to be creative and attract people's attention, but also has the ability to hit whatever their sales figures are. So that's kind of one relationship that's really important to figure out. The second thing is thinking about brands and culture. And you know, we spend a lot of time here thinking about brands, but what's really important is how to figure out how they sequence into the way that culture works. And you can define what a brand stands for and create some messaging for it, but unless you find some kind of tension or cultural wave to ride, be part of, or to go up against, it's very difficult to get the kind of momentum that really successful brands have. So not only do you have to understand what a brand does, you have to understand how it can have a role that's compelling in culture. And then the third, and probably the most important, is just to understand the crazy mess that is people, and to be really excited by their beliefs and their behaviour and their attitudes and their motivations and the fact that they all look and dress and behave and say different things. And if you're not interested by that kind of chaos, you're probably not going to be a very good planner or strategist, because unless you have that curiosity about what makes people tick and what makes lots of different people tick, then it's going to be very difficult to figure out how brands should be connecting with them. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of is actually getting time and spending time with the people that you think you're trying to have a relationship with, or your brand is. And I think quite often when you're in a country that you've grown up in, you quite often think you know all about your audience because you make assumptions and it's the same language and all of that. And going to China was really good for me, because you go somewhere where you don't know the language, you don't know anything about the culture really, you don't know much about the history of the people or how they behave, and so it forces you to really go back to basics. So before we did the whole Converse tour, we spent a bunch of time in Beijing, which is kind of the centre of alternative rock, hanging out with bands and clubs and writers and musicians, and really trying to understand their motivations and what possible kind of relationship they might want with a brand. On the left, you can see my unfortunate colleagues who didn't have such a good time because they were working on Nokia and trying to understand how to get phones to people who didn't have phones. So they went deep into the rural China and spent a lot of time there. It wasn't quite the same experience. So those are three relationships that's worth thinking about. The relationship between business and creativity, between brands and culture, and between people. So then I thought, it would be worth just covering some of the basics about what planning is and what it's trying to do. And this slide is really everything. Because if there wasn't brands and marketing and advertising and kind of creative communications, we'd just be in a world where we're buying things that look a bit like this. If you think about it, products don't have any inherent personality or attitude or values or behaviour. They're just stuff that you eat or use or drive in or buy. And until we wrap a story around them, they're just these very functional, bland things. And so really the entire job and everything that everyone is doing here is trying to imbue quite often dull objects with some kind of personality and give people an emotion and an ability to differentiate between one type of resealable sandwich bag and another. So I'm going to talk about a few things that I think are good skills for a planner to have. And the first is really to challenge familiarity. So again, the thing about particularly fast-moving consumer goods is that we're very, very accustomed to them. We see them and we use them every day, and they're not really that interesting. Now, sports cars may be different, but overall, the things that we're advertising a lot are the basics in life. And so I think perhaps the most important thing you can do is get people to look at very, very familiar objects or familiar habits or things that they're just so accustomed to and question them. This, to me, is a great example of planning. It's a world map, and it's exactly the same information that's in every world map, but it's just been flipped to put Australia at the centre. And I think it was made by an Australian who was kind of pissed off that they're always in the bottom right-hand corner. But all of a sudden it gets you to realise that the way that we look at the world is completely north-south dominant and kind of puts the UK right at the heart of it, which is kind of how it should be, but it's just worth bearing in mind that it could have Mongolia at the centre in an alternative universe. So that idea of challenging familiarity isn't just how you kind of present information, but it's also about thinking how you get work done here. And again, we have a bunch of processes here, and it's easy to slip into doing the same thing over and over again because routine is comfortable and you kind of know what you're doing. This is a briefing session that took place for PlayStation 3 out of this office years ago, and for me it's still the best example of taking the creative team and the strategist out of their day-to-day environment and asking them to consider the power of a new gaming machine in a way that allowed them to free their minds. It's also the best example I've got of where a briefing was so visually connected to the way the campaign turned out. So they went to the Museum of Contemporary Art. There was an exhibition there that was kind of hallucinogenic mushrooms in a big white space. And the whole advertising campaign, you can see, was very much influenced by that idea of being in a very white space and then seeing what could come out of the gaming machine that's PlayStation 3. And one more example about challenging familiarity, and this is more in the advertising, like the end point. So we see these things all the time, and again, for us, they're just signs. They're things to tell you where to park or not to park, or the fact that there's going to be access into a room. And I don't think we realise how, over and over again, seeing this labels anyone who's in a wheelchair or has any kind of physical disability as someone who has a kind of problem. And this piece of advertising was done in the UK last year. Don't worry, I will talk about other countries apart from the UK last year. And I think it does an amazing job of showing you that these very symbols just put us into a very, very narrow mindset. So I think a wonderful way where, I mean, you know, a brilliant film and everything there, but just the flip of using the word superhuman there changes every way that you look at these people who have kind of different bits on their bodies or are working with machines to play sport. Challenge familiarity, number one. Second thing, really important, is tell a great story. And that's both in the way that you're working with other people, but also thinking about what goes out into the world. A map again. And this is a great way of telling a story about the way the world relates to each other. And it's not a narrative, but there's a lot of great truth there. I think this is actually from an American perspective, hence the civilized world and everything else in relation. But you know, that's a story about how certain Americans, maybe here, maybe not, see the world. But again, immediately, you've got a load of information there. And whenever I'm working with planners here and thinking about how we brief creatives, I encourage them not to just write words on a page, but to think about how they can get to a point of view and emotion much more quickly using visuals. So again, another brand that we work with here is Gatorade. It's all about fitness, it's all about athletics. So rather than giving people a very kind of verbal, heavy creative brief, we tend to give them something that feels much more visual and that brings to life things like the different types of athletes we're talking about. We've got an observation here that the body is the new scoreboard, so we're interested in how this thing performs, so bring it to life with a little graphic. And just making sure that as we're talking about a sports drink, as we're talking about athletics, we're giving it to our creative team in a way that they might remember, and also in a way that can jump off into different kind of creative executions. I'm quite a big fan of maps. It's a recurring theme. I think they're an amazing way of getting an awful amount of information into one place quickly. So the thing on the right is a map from the 1913, maybe 1920s, sometime in the beginning of the 20th century, and it was really this thing called the road to success. And it has things like people who are born genius and don't need to practice in a hotel know-it-all. You have people who are falling down the hill of lack of preparation, falling down the tunnel of oblivion, and then the few lucky people who have really worked hard, avoided laziness, bad business methods, get to success. So quite a nice idea of how life works. This is a version that Matt Groening from The Simpsons did, and he's got things like Horrible Job, River of Unsold Screenplays, House of Wrinkles, so it's been repurposed for a much more contemporary audience. And one of the things that we do here is think about consumer journeys. So how do people move through not just life, but the kind of brand world? When do they connect with the world? How does that flip back to a brand? So something that we developed recently was inspired by the Matt Groening map, and was really thinking about how people, you can pass these around and have a look at them, how people travel through the world in relationship to kind of financial experiences. And the big observation we made here is that while banks quite often think about life as a linear progress, so school, college, job, relationship, house, marriage, babies, maybe a dog, retirement, and so on, it's in this very, very linear progress. Actually, the way that the world tends to work is a lot more confusing. You might you might go a few steps forward and then something bad will happen. You'll get a job, you'll lose it. You might have a load of shitty jobs. You might never move out of your parents. You might get married and then divorce. But all of these things mean that your life is in a much more turmoil. So we found that very interesting in how we were encouraging banks to talk to consumers. Hi, how you doing? So another thing that is really important and is kind of connected to this idea of challenging familiarity is to make strange connections. So if you think about it, we all have access to really the same kind of stuff. And what's interesting isn't necessarily the stuff itself, but how we can make strange connections between different bits of stuff. This is one of my favourite. Dip in anti-impotence drug use linked to World Cup. London. British men, it seems, prefer football to sex. New research into prescribing trends for anti-impotence drugs such as Viagra found the only significant drop in demand in recent years occurred during the World Cup last summer. The data suggests that when it comes to major sporting events, men turn their attention away from their own performance and towards that of their favourite football team. So that's quite an interesting link of two things that have nothing to do with each other. Sales of Viagra over here and the World Cup. Now, I look at it a different way, and I say, when your team's winning, you don't need to worry about performance, and actually you're having loads of sex and it's going really well. But the point being that you've got these two kind of facts and you can tell a story about bringing them together. This is something we did for one of our brands. It's hidden because it's secret, but it was a nice way of thinking about how different brands have different types of audiences. And what we were trying to figure out here is, what does it mean to be a business person? And you have a real kind of cliched image of a business person quite often, and you think of them wearing a suit and having a certain similar interest. And what we found was that the brand that we were working with, the people who liked that brand on Facebook liked a completely different set of brands from the brands that our competitor brands, from the brands that our competitor were following. So we managed to build out a business profile where business people were actually interested in much more progressive kind of contemporary brands rather than the more traditional ones. So that allowed us to think about business people in a more varied way. And we did the same thing with Twitter, and we could see that the competitors were following things like Forbes, Mercedes, Fannie Mae, Merrill Lynch, CNN, whereas the brand that we were working with was more into Tom's, an entrepreneur in USA Today and Fast Company. So again, more progressive, more modern. And this allowed us to not only make media choices that were different, but really to build up a more progressive character for our business person. Here's an ice cream truck. So there's a company called The Weather Company, and they used to just measure weather, and what they've realised is that obviously weather impacts behaviour, and they now make half of their money from selling the correlation between weather and people's behaviour to brands who understand that obviously people behave differently in different weather. And now, what they found in Atlanta, interestingly enough, for ice cream manufacturers, you'd think that as it gets hotter, people buy more ice cream. But actually they found that there was a point at which people started buying less ice cream because it would melt too quickly. And so therefore, an ice cream manufacturer could change the way that it sold ice cream. Here's a puzzle for you. Coca-Cola. we found that searches for Coca-Cola on Google peaked in October, which is kind of counterintuitive because you'd think they'd peak in the summer. Anybody got any thoughts about why that might happen? Yes?
Breast cancer awareness sponsorship.
Help me out with that.
Like, did they do a sponsorship around like an Avon 3-day walk?
Huh.
Or pink Coke cans or something like that to support breast cancer awareness?
Don't know. But, wow. Maybe. But what we thought was that actually it's daylight saving time. And so suddenly people are feeling really tired and want to have Coke. Now, that might or might not be true, but there are two, again, different things that you could kind of think about, well, maybe that's an interesting strategy for Coca-Cola. Another thing that is really important is to think about how you can bring people and the things that they're passionate about to life. You'll see some of the things on the wall here was for a recent workshop that we did around a seemingly quite dull product that treats dry eye. But one of the things that we tried to do was go into the target, so you can see bringing the target to life and really bring to life their day-to-day actions. And again, the more that you know about the people that you're trying to communicate with and connect with, the more you can make the right kind of strategies and communications for them. So we spend a lot of time creating things that bring our audience to life in a variety of different ways, and this tends to be a real combination of data, quotes, pictures, cultural moments, and I'll pass this around again, which is just an example of that. And again, these aren't what I'd call briefs, they're kind of jumping off points, and we'd hope that our creative teams and our strategists would kind of get a lot of stimulus from these, and that anything in here could lead to a reason to connect or a better understanding of them. So we do a lot of this stuff, and I think one of the key skills of a planner is really to think about how they kind of make their audience more than a statistic, more than a segment, and so that when you read it, you really get a sense of who they are as individuals and as groups. And of course, there are lots of ways that you can do this. Here, we've kind of looked at who they are. One of the other things that we spend a lot of time looking at is how they behave, and how they behave in relationship to different brands. We were looking at denim brands, and this is a very easy thing to do. You just look on Instagram and see how people are hashtagging different brands, and you can see that there's a completely different profile between Levi's and True Religion. So instantly, and just by searching that, you can get a sense of who's wearing the different brands. And you can see that Levi's feels a bit more studded, a bit more fashion, maybe a bit more hipster, whereas True Religion is all about showing off. It's about kind of conspicuous consumption. There's a lot of money here, and just get a very, very different feel for the brand. Something else that we thought was interesting is how the way that True Religion present themselves is actually completely different from the way their audiences present themselves. So there might be a bit of a tension. There may be something that they need to address, or maybe something that they can exploit and have fun with. But at the moment, it doesn't look like the way that the brand's presenting itself really matches up with the way that it's being talked about in social media. And we did something else, and I think the great thing about social media is that everything is out there and you can just play around with it, and that by using kind of easily accessible tools, you can tell very, very compelling stories. So we were interested in how the perception of True Religion had changed over time, because it had been a very, very kind of current brand, and it had felt to be on the top of culture, and then more recently it seemed to have kind of lost its steam. So very, very simple thing that we did was we just looked at Urban Dictionary, and we saw how definitions for True Religion had changed. So I'll have to go up close and read this, but in 2006, great jeans brand, great fit, mentioned in My Humps by the Black Eyed Peas. And then 2007, people weren't quite as positive. Expensive designer jeans that have a horseshoe like you sticked onto the back pockets. Movie stars and rich people wear those jeans. They range from $175 to around $450. Nice jeans. So not quite as enthusiastic, but still kind of positive. Then something happened by 2009, and again, we thought that maybe, you think about the Great Recession, kicked off in 2008, 2009, maybe that kind of conspicuous, expensive jeans weren't quite as appropriate. Gaudy, shit quality jeans that everyone seems to like and wear in absolute defiance of common sense and style. Has disgusting stitching and back pocket designs. So things aren't looking so good for the brand there. We get to 2010 and they've got two Overpriced jeans for people who feel the need to flaunt their financial status. Apparel made for people so wrapped up in their image they actually pay $400 to advertise for the company. So that's a really simple thing to do, but you can really tell a story about true religion. We also had a look on Twitter, and this is an unedited compilation of the top tweets around true religion. I don't know why dudes spend $200 on true religion jeans just to look like a gay cowboy. One way you can tell if a woman's tits are fake is if her fiancé is wearing true religion jeans. Horror movie pitch. Someone in true religion jeans starts talking to you. So, again, as you can see, this is out there for everybody. You can compile it, and in a minute, you've got a really nice snapshot of how a brand is fitting or not fitting in culture. And all of these things are totally accessible, and it's about how you kind of compile them and make great stories. Or you can go the other way and make something that feels much more structured. This is thinking about how women buy, wear, and use jeans. And it does everything from looking at who are the largest influencers, so we can see friends and families are the largest influencers. And then the fact that, you know, when women find a pair of jeans that they love, they'll fix them. They call them sick, and they'll take them to be repaired. And eventually a good pair of jeans becomes your best friend. So there's a bit of Twitter stuff in here. There are some statistics. There are some interviews. And so overall, that gives a really nice picture of a woman's relationship with her jeans. And you could think about how a brand could talk about a particular state here, about loving jeans, about sick jeans, about jeans being worn out or your best friend. So again, they're all different jumping off points for creative. Another great place to look for bringing your audience to life and for bringing culture to life is just the pop culture that's out there. And I think there are certain properties which just tell us so much. Grand Theft Auto being one. Not only every time does a game come out is it this kind of global event, but it just tells us so much about the way that the world is. And, you know, the commentaries about it seem to go between two different ways. So on one hand, a dazzling but monstrous parody of modern life, freewheeling nihilistic satire on Western society. So there's a game playing the role that writing and criticism used to. And then on the other hand, what troubles me about Grand Theft Auto is not just the message it sends out to youngsters, but what it says about the coarsening, the decadence and the hopelessness of modern culture. So they're looking at the same thing and coming out with two very, very different stories. The other great thing, of course, is you can just find out what your friends think. If you're looking for further evidence that Grand Theft Auto 5 is the greatest entertainment achievement of this generation, consider the following. In 5 hours of gameplay and 8.7% of the way through the main storyline, I hit the bong, hallucinated aliens, got a gay Rottweiler named Chop, filmed a paparazzi sex tape of a starlet getting butt-sexed by a Justin Bieber clone, filmed another tape of her chasing through fake West Hollywood, I tore down a house I thought belonged to her. You get the idea. And it's just this brilliant, immersive experience of how they're seeing Grand Theft Auto, almost as more fun than living. This is my life now. I'm happy here. And if all else fails, Breaking Bad, you can support any argument you want. It can be an argument about the healthcare system in America, the prevalence of methamphetamine, how chemistry teachers can go from being nice to being really violent. Anything you want is in that program. That's like a get out of jail free for strategy. And then finally in this area, I think the key thing that anyone needs to do is like develop what their special skills are. I don't think that there's one way of doing planning, and I don't think there are great planners and bad planners, although actually maybe there are some great ones and bad ones, but there's certainly not one way of doing it. And I think the core thing is to understand the kind of planning that you want to do and how you can use the things that you care about and are passionate about and are good at to turn into a certain set of planning skills. And I guess one of the difficult things about planning is that it requires you to be lots and lots of different things, not necessarily at the same time, but quite often within 1 week, within one set of occasions. So you've got to be a presenter. You've got to be able to step up and persuade a client that what you're telling them about their brand and their audience makes sense. You've got to be a moderator, so sometimes you'll be working with a group of people and trying to guide them towards a particular conclusion. You've got to be the voice of the audience. You've got to understand social. You've got to understand data. You've got to be able to research. You've got to think strategically. So all of these things make up what a planner is. And sometimes you might be really good at one and not so good at another, and that's fine. Every planner is going to be a combination of those things and a bunch more as well. But it does mean that it can be quite confusing. I don't normally do pie charts, but I think this one is very helpful when you're trying to pin down what planning might be. There are a few people who get it, and then everyone else are kind of not really sure. So, are you confused, or is that okay so far? 50-50. All right. Well, that's okay, because at times like this, I always find that Bruce Lee helps. I don't know if any of you have seen Game of Death. It's a great film where Bruce Lee travels to this kind of building, I guess, a tower, I think. And on each level, he comes across a different opponent. And the amazing thing about this is that on each level, they're kind of using a different fighting style. So someone will have a sword, someone will have the nunchucks. On one, I think this is the top one, the guy's incredibly tall, like about 8 foot or something. And sorry?
It's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
That's right. Yeah, he's seen the film. Now, unsurprisingly, at the end, although it's quite tight, Bruce Lee wins. And the reason he wins is because he doesn't have one style of fighting. And this is how he talks about it. Don't get set into one form, adapt it and build your own. Let it grow, be like water. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. And what he's saying is that by limiting yourself to one style of fighting, you might become very, very good at it, but as soon as someone else comes who does another style, they might be able to beat you. So he never defined his style and was able to take on all comers. And I think this is a very good guide for how to think about planning, that you don't want to get locked into one particular approach, but be able to embrace loads of different. Now, you might have your favorite things, you might have stuff that you're really good at, but the more that you can embrace and think about all those different titles that I put up there, the better planner you'll be. Wow, that's messy, isn't it? But that's okay, because it's appropriate. It's about convergence. So I made it difficult. I think I might have made it maybe 10% too difficult. So that was the first part, which was kind of planning in general. And I think there are some things that are happening now that makes planning much more interesting, but even more confusing. And that's the point that everything is kind of merging. Convergence is a constant process, not an endpoint. Technology, creativity, and media are constantly evolving, and so is the convergent company. It's a never-ending challenge to adapt to customer experience that in our digital age will always be in flux. So this was the CEO of Razorfish who said this, and I think it's a great quote, because it says all these things are coming together, and because of this, we're always going to be in a time when our challenges are dynamic, unstable, and it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of get a fix on them. And again, I think it's really important that we embrace this, because if we're trying to plan or work or create companies that only do things in a specific way, that's not going to work, because very, very quickly the world will have turned and gone somewhere else. So I think it's really, really important that we embrace the fact that we're always going to be in flux. Now, luckily, LA is a city that's all about convergence, particularly now. I think we're really lucky to be here at this point, because LA used to be a bit one-sided, right? It used to be about entertainment, used to be seen as being superficial, but now it's got much more media, it's got tech coming in, it's respected as being a fashion centre, it's got a really, really healthy art scene. I think we're in an amazing city in terms of the kind of skills and the kind of opportunities that communications offer. So I feel very, very lucky. But then I come from a place where it rains all the time, so it might just be the sunshine. So the other thing that convergence means is that the kind of work that our clients and our brands want from us doesn't fit a particular form. It takes on all kinds of things. And the successful companies here and the successful people will have the nimbleness to jump between lots and lots of different forms. I mean, this is a bunch of work from the last year or two, and you can see that there's such a range. All of this, I'd suggest, is good brand work, right? It's good brand activity. It helps do what we said right at the beginning, which is to move sales, to move brand perceptions. But it's such a different variation. On one hand, you've got Red Bull spending millions and millions of dollars to take a man up in a balloon higher than has ever happened before, so a kind of world first. On the other hand, you've got Oreos making different coloured cookies every day. You've got Arby's tweeting one thing at the Oscars and being the most tweeted about brand. They have no relationship with Pharrell, nothing to do with the Oscars, and because someone who works there saw a connection between their logo and Pharrell's Vivienne Westwood hat, it made kind of social media gold. And I think, again, this is very, very much about convergence. We have to be comfortable with knowing that when we're working with brands, we might end up making anything. Importantly, the old TV ad still works. So you might have heard that, you know, the end of TV advertising, no good at all. But when you get a puppy and a horse in the same commercial and they fall in love, who can resist that? So this second bit is called the opportunities and temptations of convergence. And I think the converged world offers a really great playground for brands and for our industry to play in, but it also offers quite a few trip-ups and things that you can do badly. So what I'm going to talk about here, I think, is 5 things that are either good or bad, or good and bad. Here's a very utopian quote about the way the world's going. We've entered a new golden age, one in which technology has finally caught up with humans' endless curiosity, and one that has potential to revolutionise a wide swathe of occupations and research fields. Isn't that exciting? And this is a quote about how Darwin would work today. Now, Darwin was notorious for keeping himself to himself. He spent years and years developing his theories about basically everything that we know about how humans evolved, but he didn't tell anyone. He just made notes and was really resistant to publishing anything. In the end, he was forced to it because he felt that someone else might beat him to it. But he really was just like making his own theories. And this is a point of view about the fact that he would have worked completely differently today. He would not be operating this way. He'd be very likely to be tweeting from the Beagle. He'd be announcing his findings and initial ideas online. People would be arguing with him all along, taking his ideas, applying them elsewhere, pushing back. All of the things we do on the web. The work has revolutionary, incredible value, but put into the web it gets teased out, amplified, corrected, as well as misunderstood and degraded. Nevertheless, that web itself has more value than the individual content. So I'd expect that Darwin today would be gathering his data from clouds of linked data, trying out ideas on the web, drawing those ideas in the tussle. The old rhythm of knowledge and science, not coincidentally, is a rhythm of publishing. The web has completely broken that rhythm. So we all kind of know that. We know that we work differently, but I think it's fundamental to understand that anything that we're trying to do happens in this constant noise and to and fro-ness and back and forth, and that we can't ever release anything into the world that's pure and that is ours and that is not going to be touched. It's always going to have other effects on it. So one other role, as well as all those other ones, that I think a strategist has to play here is almost this idea of a guide, and that's the Garden of Eden. So I feel that there are a lot of temptations out there in this converged world that brands particularly want to jump out and get involved in, and that one thing that a strategist can do is help to guide brands to try and do the right thing. So I'm going to talk about these 5 opportunities and temptations. The first is about data. Everyone knows about data. Data has got a lot of love and a lot of attention recently. And overall, there's a kind of feeling that, yeah, data is a pretty good thing and you can do wonderful things with data and you should love it, and open data is great and it's almost sexy, and all of these things that 5 years ago you'd never have heard. But this is my favourite quote. The problem with big data is that no one really understands it. We know it's all out there and we try and do these little things with it, but it's actually much, much more complicated. And I think it gives us this fake sense of omniscience and awareness that very, very rarely is actually put into useful forms. So we rely on infographics. And I think that infographics can be done well, but tend to be a very, very simplistic way of presenting data in a way that feels accessible, but actually isn't really helping us to get to any answers. And if you remember what I said up at the beginning, we need to tell stories, we need to get people to challenge the familiar. And I think infographics are this seductive way that pretend to explain the world, but quite often don't really get us to anything. They just describe things. So here's one way of asking, is the world getting better or worse? Lots and lots of information here, which might tell a story, but it's really, really hard to work through. And I don't really know at the end if it is getting better or worse. I know that some things are going up or down and that there's some more stuff over here, but it would take me a long time to figure out whether or not the world is getting better or worse. Here are some maps about house prices and rent prices in the UK. You can see that property prices went up, and you can see that it's very expensive to rent things in London, and that more people are living with their parents, and that the relationship of house price to earnings has gone up. So that tells you something, but again, you've got to work hard to get it. And I would say a good kind of planning version of this might look a bit more like this. So basically, the very rich people live in the centre and everyone else is a bit of a loser. And that's much more impactful and tells you the same stuff as beforehand, but does it in a way that you might remember. Now, there are brands who use data well. I think GE is a great example. And one of the things that they try and do is help you understand how individual actions can have huge implications. So this talks about how really small efficiency gains at a time can have these huge benefits over kind of 15 years. And I think what's really nice about this is that you get a simple story of how it affects different industries. So there are some brands who are doing it well. So I think data's great when it's used nicely, but I think too often we just present facts and think that that's enough. Our runway is a great example of using data to change behaviour. So I don't know if you're familiar with our runway. Jen's laughing, so she obviously knows it. But one of the things that they discovered was that when regular people and not models modelled the clothes, sales went up by 200%. And that's something that they wouldn't have been able to necessarily make a decision about without the data, because you have these assumptions about how things work in fashion, but they were just watching how people were buying clothes, and therefore they changed the way that they modelled a lot of their clothes and saw their sales rise. And that's the kind of thing we should be trying to do with data, leading to an action rather than just describe a situation. Neophilia. It's not a bad habit, it just means that you love new things. And again, in advertising, I think we have a fascination with things that haven't come before, and we believe that novelty has a value in itself. And I think sometimes we can get seduced by things that are new without understanding why we might want to be involved with them and use them. So this guy, oh, it's a bit small. I don't know if read this book. It's really good. It's called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and it really is a universal theory about everything. It's all about fragility and resilience and how you survive in a very, very unstable world. But one of the things that he says is that the longer a technology lives, the longer it can be expected to live. So he says, you know, things like paper, it's been around for thousands of years, will definitely be on for thousands more years. Something like wine or coffee, we made it hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years ago, we're still drinking it now, we probably will in the future. Pop-Tarts might not last so long. Snapchat might not be around in 10 years. And so he believes that good technology is technology that has withstood the test of time. Now, obviously, there's loads of great new technology out there, but I think as brands, we have this temptation to just jump into all of it and really get involved without thinking about why we might be working with it and what we can get from it. So, obviously, there are brands who have been very creative in their use of social media. I think Lowe's, surprisingly, has been a bit of a star here, and it's not really the kind of brand that you'd associate with being deft in social media. But what they did very well was define a role for themselves. They said, we'll share very simple tips about how to do DIY, and that's all we do. We won't try and be funny, we'll try and be useful. And they found a very good format for it. So that's a great example. And I mentioned Arby's already, so just really very quickly responding and using Twitter at its best, which is to be part of a cultural moment, respond in a way that reflects really, really well back on the brand, actually surprises you, and it gets Arby's into a completely different consideration set. And this is a nice example. We all know that newspapers are dead, and I think the New York Times has done a good job of looking at different ways of telling stories. Let's see if we can... So they've done a really nice job of using kind of film and maps and photography to tell a story. And every now and then, you'll get to the bit that feels like a newspaper, and it reads really well. And then you'll get back to a lovely photography, some sound. And it's just a beautiful way of telling a story that doesn't really abandon some of the principles of newspapers, but just makes them a lot more compelling. And I think showing that willingness to dive into a world that historically newspapers have really kind of held back from is great. I'm going to have to close that, otherwise it's going to go on the whole time. It's a tricky mouse. Here's an example of a brand that didn't do so well on Twitter. So JP Morgan thought, you know, people don't really understand us. Maybe we'll take to the medium of the people to just have a back and forth conversation. I'm sure you know what happened. But basically people, you know, took them at their word and asked a bunch of questions. You know, when you lock people out of their homes and ruin their lives, did you still send them credit and card invitations just to run it? What's the best way to get bloodstains out of a clown suit? As a young sociopath, how can I succeed in finance? Persistence. It took us years to recognise our sociopathic. So they got a conversation going, but it wasn't really the conversation that they want. And, you know, they decided that bad idea. This is actually my favourite tweet from them, and I read that, and I actually liked them a little bit more. Back to the drawing board. And then there are just brands who kind of are connected to cultural events but just don't get it at all. So Aurora is trending, clearly about our Kim K inspired Aurora dress, not a good move. They've obviously got someone in a social job who sees the word Aurora trending and thinks, time to go. Likewise, SpaghettiOs, take a moment to... Sometimes there are things that brands just shouldn't be getting involved in, and this is what I'd call kind of bad behaviour. Just using the medium in the wrong way and trying to get out there in a way that gets them visibility but does them no service at all as a brand. And I don't know if you saw this US Airways one, but yeah, quite ridiculous. We apologise for the inappropriate. I love all these very formal things, like it happened accidentally. Yeah, very weird. And then Vine, we talked about Lowe's earlier. But again, people or brands realise that there are these new platforms out there. They jump into them and they really don't know why. So USA Today did a series where they took you behind the scenes of an editorial meeting. Not very exciting. 6 seconds of people sitting at desks scratching their head. Trident had a whole series of people unwrapping gum. Again, not really a great use of the media. And I think this is what I mean by neophilia. Because stuff is out there, it doesn't mean that you should jump into it. Now, I don't have a good thing to say about this. I've invented a term, obsessive curation disorder, and I think it's something that we do to a very high degree because it feels comfortable and relatively easy. We have unlimited storage space, we have lots of ways of organising information in a way that looks nice, and we like things like Pinterest. And so we organise things like this and we enjoy collections, but quite often I find strategists who feel that this is strategy, who just throw a bunch of stuff in my face and think that that's telling me something about the world. And I think that's all I've got to say about obsessive curation disorder. Just don't do too much of it and don't believe that it's telling you anything if you're just giving me stuff. Although eBay have done quite well with it because they've understood that curation can actually lead through to purchase. Here's an opportunity, which is about the merging of content and commerce. And I think if I was getting into communication and advertising today, this is where I'll be working. Because I think this is the future of all kinds of communications and content, is thinking about how whatever you're saying can be much more directly related to how people behave. If you think about how messaging used to work, you used to see something over here and have to go and buy it at another time in another place, and that distance has been pretty much erased. This person says it well. It's easy to overlook the bigger opportunity is the blurring of boundaries between content and commerce. If we accept that a majority of consumers will now experience our brands not on destination websites but distributed across the stream, it is essential that we begin to build the ability to transact within the screen. So this would be my job tip for the day. If you're looking to be kind of relevant and to think about the way that the world is emerging and changing, it's thinking about how content and commerce are really becoming bedfellows. eBay recently said that they're no longer in the e-commerce business, which is $1 trillion. $1 trillion, but in the commerce business, which is $10 trillion. So they're no longer thinking of themselves as an e-commerce business, just as somewhere where you buy stuff. And you're seeing some really interesting brands out here. So Soldsy is a way that you can buy the things that you like on Facebook. Starbucks have experimented with using tweets to buy coffee. So the thing that you're carrying in your hand becoming not only the communication device, but also the delivery device as well. You're seeing, no doubt, this Amazon Dash means you can just go and scan anything in your house and it's delivered again. And Mulu is really interesting because what they're doing is making magazines shoppable. So they've got a way that they are seeing the products that turn up in magazines, linking them to shopping occasions, and again, blurring that boundary. And they've recently done something called The Latest, which means that you don't even have to go to the magazines anymore because they're compiling the magazines for you. So you choose the magazines or the areas that you like, and that takes you straight to an opportunity to buy them. So that's my tip for the day in terms of where it'll be good to think about working. And this is the last point, and it's hyperactivity. And I love hyperactivity, and I like lots of stuff, and I like brands who go out in the world and kind of surprise us with the range of their activity. And I think some of them do it really well, and I think others don't know why they're doing it. So Red Bull, we love. And you know, Red Bull realised that it was so active in so many different areas that it could create its own media channel that other brands would pay money to appear on, and that became a revenue stream for itself, which I think is brilliant, turning your advertising and your communications into something that makes you money. And although they were very, very active, it all came out of a truth about the product, and something that was in their behaviour right from the start was that they'd always been interested in kind of action sports, and specifically in things that gave you wings. The most important lesson from the event, that was Felix jumping out of the balloon, is perhaps this: the power of an organising idea for a brand. Red Bull Gives You Wings is a brand's time-honoured platform, and one that serves not just as a consumer proposition, but also as a driving force for the business and its marketing activities. Rarely can a marketing claim have been dramatised more extravagantly, but without the brilliant distillation of the brand's benefit down to those 3 words, last week's event might never have happened. By comparison, I point you to Samsung. Now, I think Samsung do excellent marketing, and they've had a lot of great success in the last year. The most tweeted thing ever with the selfie at the Oscars. The great stuff they've been doing around the World Cup. When we first saw Winner Takes Earth, we worked with Adidas here. We were worried that this was Nike who had done it. We thought, what a great line. And then it turns up that it's Samsung, and they've got a better lineup of athletes than either Adidas or Nike. They've done great things with Jay-Z, with LeBron. And all of this feels like excellent marketing, but I just don't know what it's telling me about the brand. And they're currently spending 6% of their revenue on advertising. And that is an incredible percentage. Most brands spend between maybe 0.5 to 2% of their revenue. So they're having to spend huge amounts of money to get this noise. And if you read about their kind of awareness and what they're saying, you realise that it doesn't really stick. They're getting loads and loads of visibility, but it's not really giving any meaning. And that's why when you see an April Fool's like this, you're not sure for a minute whether or not it is, because you think, oh, maybe Samsung are doing something with puppies. Looks quite cute, doesn't it? So I want to end with dogs, because we think that dogs are really important here. And this is Lee Clow, who is our Chief Creative Officer for the TBWA network. And he loves dogs and has shown us that having dogs in the building makes us all better people. It makes a happier workplace. But one of the things that he says is that great brands celebrate what they love. They're not cold, they have a soul, a character. If your brand does not have a belief, if it does not have a soul, does not correctly architect its message everywhere, it can become irrelevant. The emotional centre, the belief of a brand, has to inform its behaviour, and this can't all be done with the left side of the brain. And if you remember right back to the beginning, the business and the creativity, that is a left side and a right side of the brain coming together, and that's what I think the job of the strategist is to identify that soul by understanding the brand and its role in culture and the people, and then to think about how that soul informs its behaviour. 8 o'clock on the nose, how about that? So I'm done, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Larry. Larry runs our smart division here, which is social media arts, and he's going to talk a little bit about the kind of work that he does. Maybe I should set up a little bit why I've got some other pies here. I'm not going to give it. It's good up here. Actually, I've got another friend. No, I haven't. Just one thing. As I said, all kinds of people can be planners, and what I wanted to do was try and give you a little reflection of the different types of planning and planners that are here, and how I couldn't do my job without having this really good mix of people. So with that, Larry Lack.
Cool. What's up, everybody? I'm Larry. I'm director of social media. Is there Phil Ritter in the room? Because I appreciate the tweet he sent out. So thank you, dude. That's me. I just favored it. So I guess I'm just here to tell 2 or 3 quick stories, a little bit about me, how I got here. But please chime in with questions. It's kind of a totally winding road. So I just want to start with this quote: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And it kind of seems like completely antithetical advice around finding a career path. But I think as it relates to planning, it's totally relevant. Because I think what we talked about a lot is that experiences your depth and your richness. It brings so much to planning. And I think kind of my career is point and proof of that. So I never ever planned to work in social media, strategy, or advertising, but a winding road is a really good thing. For me, one of my principles is chase whatever drives you. Totally a cliche, but it always pays off. This is Stanley Kubrick. I think I credit this as kind of like the original selfie, because he took this. I think he took this when he was like 22 years old, and the moment I saw Clockwork Orange, my mind was blown. So I was groomed from a child to be an electrical engineer. So I think this is an AutoCAD design of a multi-circuit thing. My dad would just show me this stuff ad nauseum. He'd show me how to weld and everything. And when it came time to make a choice, I said no to an engineering scholarship to go into massive debt as a film student. There I am at the bottom with the NYU Bobcat. So it was an interesting day for my parents, because they were wondering, like, so what the hell are you going to do now? You have no skills, and you literally watched movies for 4 years. But I learned about the world it takes to tell a great story. And I think it's just really important, because just the 3 areas of what I took away from film were screenwriting, production, and editing. So what I learned from screenwriting is that it seems really easy to write a script. Everyone's got a script, especially in LA. But when you're reading it aloud in the dialogue to a room of your peers who are as talented, if not more so than you, when your dialogue sucks, it really sucks, and you can really feel it. I think, and what I learned about production was that it's not just a director and a camera. It's the cinematographer, it's the gaffer, it's the grips, it's the PAs, it's everyone. It takes a tremendous kind of team effort to bring anything to life. And in editing, right? The most beautifully edited films are completely seamless. You don't notice it. So I think, again, I phrase it this way because it's a world to tell a great story, and great stories are really simple and clean, but I think I had just such a reverence for creative work that I learned from film, because it takes, honestly, an army to make a 5-minute short. I think next principle of mine, this is Zoe Barnes from House of Cards. Find the truth, but more importantly, and how to wield it. So when I graduated from school, I realized something super important. I have to eat. And so I had to find a job. And so I had a minor in screenwriting, and I used it kind of as a foot in the door for journalism. So I joined this small company called EPM, and I wrote for the entertainment marketing letter Beat. And so what I did was, I was the youngest kind of by far, and I handled kind of digital, because they didn't really get digital. It was kind of a paid subscriber-based subscription. So I took things like, oh, I'll blog for you guys. And they said, well, what's that? Oh, I'll just write a short paragraph and we'll put it up online. And it kind of blew their minds that but what are we going to charge for that? How are we going to get money for it? And I said, no, like, it's going to all come around, right? Put together some thought pieces on social media and on some trends. And the biggest story I got was this exclusive with David Stern, commissioner of the NBA. And this was right around the time Second Life launched. So for those that aren't aware, Second Life it's not even a game, it's honestly just a digital world where you can be kind of an avatar and explore anything, right? There are stores on there. And the NBA had launched a huge presence where you could actually go and just be a part of the NBA and just see all the different characters. So I had 15 minutes exactly with him. He had 3 publicists with him. I was over the phone, so they would all chime in here and there. And I was pretty gentle on him. I think I was just a 21-year-old kid. And so at the end of it, I just asked, we were wrapped up. Thank you, great interview. I said, so, Mr. Stern, are you on Second Life? Like, are you using it? And he said, frankly, I just don't get it or use it, but it's what the kids are doing these days. 3 publicists just chime in, hey, that's off the record, that is off the record, do not print that. And so I'm sitting there, right? I've been recording it, I have it down, I'm like, this kind of changes the entire story for this. So when I got off the phone, I was writing the story, and his publicist actually called the owner of the whole company and said, I got, we met with this kid named Larry, he wrote the story, he said something, I'll quote, you cannot print that. And so it actually worked out where I said, okay, you know what, here's a more flattering piece. We're not really kind of around gossiping, we're around marketing. But what we were able to negotiate was I got to be kind of the exclusive on their embargo list for any future breaking NBA releases. So it was right up there with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and this young kid who does this blogging thing that doesn't really make any sense. So again, how to wield the truth is just super important. And I think, again, there's ways you can kind of phrase that, but again, look at the bigger picture, right? Look at what it can get you and how you find it and how you seek it out. Learn the rules, but more importantly, so you know how to break them. So I think from that experience, I was just amazed at, as kind of this journalist scrounging to talk to these people, wow, how cool would it be to tell the stories on the brand side, to have the influence of a publicist, to be able to call and make these decisions and kind of, make these connections. So I joined a super old school New York City PR firm. It's called Rubenstein. Howard Rubenstein, my boss, is there in the center and the left between two nobodies named Michael Bloomberg and Rupert Murdoch. And so I joined as bottom of the barrel junior publicist and learned all the traditional principles of PR, of just high regard, your reputation, you always tell the truth so you never have to remember anything. All these things were really amazing and kind of blew my mind. But the process, right, was really challenging. I think as it goes as a publicist, what you do is, especially for my role as an assistant, you get a release, probably written by a vice president. You take that release, you find categories through Cision or other journalist database. You pull out those top people, ideally, I think 50 to 60. From that list, you email them as the assistant, and then you wait. And you call, maybe if someone bites, you call a day later, and you just wait. It's this waiting game. So I took that, and I wondered, there's this thing called Twitter that's kind of taking off at this point. And I would look at the list of journalists, and then I would look at who of them were on Twitter, right? It was probably maybe 5% of them. So from a list of about 100, I would just have 5 people that were on Twitter and that were active. So I went to kind of the management and I said, hey, is it cool if I use this new social platform to tweet from kind of the firm? I can use my own name and just build up that relationship that way. They said, does it cost anything? I said, no. They said, okay, go for it. So I ended up, within 2 months, I got more journalists writing back to me than kind of all the assistants, because they were just kind of blasting these emails. And it was amazing because we got to this point where we didn't not only use Twitter as outreach, but we used it as a product and as a deliverable that we sold. So I went from kind of this assistant publicist to now sort of kind of the digital kid in the room. And they would package Twitter and we would start selling that to clients. So social media, kind of the early rumblings of community management. And so that led me to kind of one of the biggest pitches I had to do to sell in Twitter. And that was with this man, Donald Trump. Sometimes I regretted knowing Twitter. So it was, yes. Oh, he has a really long list of shitty tweets. It was for The Apprentice Season 2. And I just remember being in the room, again, youngest by like 20 years. And so it came to me and said, okay, you gotta just talk to Donald about what you wanna do for Twitter. And so I said, oh, consider using Twitter as a personal platform, right? We'll work alongside with NBC and The Apprentice, and it's neat because people get to learn a little bit about you. He has this like angry look on his face. And he says, I don't get it. What would I tweet about? Like what, I had breakfast this morning? And I said, yeah, like that's exactly what you would tweet about. And he said, that doesn't make any sense. What wouldn't I tweet about? And I said, before I could think of a witty answer about what not to tweet and be politically correct to everyone in the room, he says, I don't get it, this is stupid, let's move on. And so I had the misfortune of later riding with him one-on-one in an elevator going down. His driver had left to get the car, and so he looks at me, he recognizes me from the meeting. And so I'm thinking, like, this is the movie moment where I have to have my elevator pitch. This is where I'm going to redeem myself, I'm going to sell in Twitter, he's going to get in his car, and he's going to love it. So as I'm thinking through, he cuts me off. He says, so are you a student, or are you an intern at this place? I'm like, no, I work here. And he said, really? Where'd you go to school? I said, NYU. And he said, great, Stern, fantastic business school. I said, actually, I went to Tisch, the film school. And he said, oh, man, you really wasted your parents' money. And so in that moment, I was like, okay, that's something you probably shouldn't tweet. Again, it's kind of this winding journey of just figuring out kind of the tools and the processes to get there, because that's one of the coolest things about digital. And just lastly, really quickly, right, just putting it all together. So I think that's honestly the beauty of advertising, in that I never thought going to film school, being a journalist, working in PR would ever get me into advertising. But I think that right now we're just in this interesting place where people have different talents, and again, they converge and they make really neat and cool things. So I joined, Wieden and Kennedy brought me over to New York because they saw some of the work I'd done for the New York Yankees. And I got to work on ESPN. So what seems like kind of this weird formula actually came together. So I joined Wieden as their first ever community manager. We weren't really sure what it was supposed to be, but my brief was get ESPN on social. So we started with kind of, obviously with Twitter, with Facebook, and all those platforms. But what was amazing being at Wieden was I would work with kind of the creatives that did all the above the lines TV ads. So this is SportsCenter. And so I would always fight to get to be on the shoot because we needed content and we needed photos, and I think that it'd be amazing. Like, this is amazing. This is a gold mine for social content. And they said, well, listen, social has zero money, so what can you do? I said, listen, if you can get 5 minutes with Alexander Ovechkin, they're doing the ESPN spy shot. He kind of comes down from the ceiling. He looks like he's stealing files. It's around kind of like the Russian controversy then. And I said, if you can get me with him for 5 minutes, and I hate this word, and I only used it once, I said, I know that I can make a viral video.
I never thought I'd come.
I said it once, and I will never ever say it again. And so I think everyone in this room gets that that's nearly impossible. But I said, I have to go balls to the walls. I have to do something. And I said, my pitch to them was, listen, I know all the hockey blogs. I can find Russian blogs. Like, I know how to kind of seed this out from kind of my PR background. I know how to shoot and I know how to edit this, again, from the film school thing. And I think if we get really weird and tell a really funny story, it could work. So again, what reality looks like. So 5 minutes with him, I had to pitch him on set, and I said, hey, could we get you for 5 minutes where you're going to hit hockey pucks at Russian nesting dolls filled with Russian dressing? And he said, sure. And he just went and did it. I won't play the whole thing.
We got Washington Capitals superstar Alexander Ovechkin.
But this is done.
And we're going to test his shooting accuracy by filling up these Russian dolls with Russian.
And when was this?
This was in 2007, 2008, or no, 2010, I think. That guy was a community manager. He was amazing, by the way.
That's incredible.
And so we had to do 2 takes because the first set of dolls that exploded, they didn't pop like that, so we actually filled it with half club soda, half Russian dressing. So again, so this was done for honestly no money. The cost of Russian dressing dolls, I think in 4 days it got 300,000 views. In 1 month it got 1 million views, and then I think right now it's at 2.2 million. So zero media money. But again, I think it just proves a point that in advertising, they need everyone's unique talents, right? And I think that you will just never know when things kind of will come together. And I think it's a really neat manifestation because you get to flex all your muscles, and I've never been able to do that with such flexibility like you can in planning and in strategy. And I think you may feel like kind of your talents are kind of tangential or not related, but you'd be amazed in how much of that goes into planning, because if it's not coming from who you are and what you care about, it just doesn't come out in the work. I have just one more quick example and I'll hand it off. So work we did here, right? What does salad dressing have to do with half-naked douche?
Salad dressing. This is the
Yeah, no, that's honestly, that's the secret to virality, guys, just use salad dressing. So Kraft was in a really, I think the search term for that was shirtless hunk, if anyone wants to find the reference. But Kraft was in a really interesting situation where salad dressing, especially kind of just the full flavor, calorie version, was kind of on decline. Same challenge, didn't really have a huge media budget. They wanted to kind of cut through all the competitors. So we thought, let's combine the two, and this is kind of like the case study that sums it all up.
I've only got one thing on my mind. Getting you, Zesty. That's nice.
As a leader in an overly pragmatic category, Kraft reinvented the way salad dressing related to its female audience by adding some zest to the conversation. Meet the Zesty guy. He's the host of a cooking show, and though he may not really be a culinary expert, he uses his charm to make delicious things happen. Tapping into a cultural trend, this campaign was written by women, for women, and designed to give women exactly what they were craving. And they loved it.
We gotta get to this next thing because it has been burning up our heat index. The Zesty guy we've been showing you all morning, undressing to sell salad dressing.
We wanted to make the biggest impact possible, so we chose to partner with Bravo, whose particularly vocal fan base was sure to help us break through the chatter. In contextually relevant spots, our Zesty guy wove Real Housewife inside jokes into his culinary repertoire. These spots aired throughout primetime Bravo programming for just 1 week, building buzz leading up to a Zesty appearance on Andy Cohen's Watch What Happens Live.
That's the Zesty guy.
To keep the conversation going, we assembled a digital dream team, looking for any opportunity to engage our target in real time. The result was hundreds of high-quality, personalized interactions. Every response happened in under 10 minutes and targeted the most relevant, influential users. Fans were sent to getmezesty.com, where they could send Zestygrams of their own, creating a personal relationship between the Zesty guy and the consumer. Ultimately, this social media presence earned us the attention of popular media outlets, creating millions of impressions for the campaign and, most importantly, getting women everywhere feeling zesty.
Let's get zesty.
So just a quick background on this. So I had a community manager on my team who was the voice of the Zesty guy. So what we would do every morning, and this was the most fun of my day, we would read the hundreds of extremely X-rated tweets that women would be sending to him. Like they were like, I was gonna pull some, but they're like utterly perverse. It's not even like funny. It's just literally like, this is just sick. Like this is unreal. And it's just like the fact that I think it would be so funny if they knew who they were talking to, because she's this like short Jewish girl who was just like, oh my God, this is unreal. But that's all the joy in social. So again, thank you guys, appreciate it. But it's a winding road, but that's the coolest part about strategy.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Larry.
Any questions? Happy to answer any. Yeah, sure.
The only question I have is, are you still using the same Twitter handle that you did when you started?
I personally, yes, but
Like when you worked at PR firm in here?
No, that one I ran their PR handle
Yeah.
just because it was more official.
Makes
But
sense.
yeah, but I've tried to keep my own.
Larry's taking over. Yeah, the front page.
That's me.
All right, we're in business. This is Jen. She's going to tell you about stealing things.
Hi. This is how I got into planning. Rejection really early on. I'm a sophomore in college. I am at an account service internship interview at GSD&M in Austin because I have no idea that strategy is a legit career and something I could actually do. And I've already decided that I'm clearly not getting this job. There's absolutely no way. I lack basic organizational skills and I had messy hair. And so I've gone completely off script. She's asked me, this account director, what interests me, and I'm rattling on about paradox of choice and cognitive patterns and the economics of drag queens, and she stops me and she's like, sweetie, let me take you upstairs to the planners. You don't belong here. And it was the best thing that's probably ever happened to me, and I wish I remembered who this was so I could send her a thank you note. But she took me upstairs to the planners, and I never left because that was the first place I found where I could actually mix up and layer in all those different ways that I make sense of the world without having to learn Illustrator. So, and that is actually related to what I love the most about planning and what I think makes a good planner, a good strategy. And it's this, it's just 4 words from Ferris, and it's talent imitates and genius steals. So what I'm not talking about is sort of the wholesale ripping off of somebody else's stuff or their ideas. No, I'm talking about the idea that when it comes to creativity, nothing comes from nothing. That every brilliant idea is a brilliant new merger, combination, mix-up of stuff that's already out there. So, just like everyone's favorite non-DJ, good strategy is like an awesome girl talk track where things have been mixed and reassembled in a completely new way to make it excellent. So today, there's 3 ways that I keep myself in check to make sure that I've got sort of the right inputs for an excellent cultural mashup. Girl, drag queens know what is hot right now, and so should you. As planners, it's our job to know, like Nick was talking about, everything that's happening in the world, right? Because the more we know, the more that we've sort of immersed ourselves in an excellent source of inputs and things around us, the more that we consume and the more we know, the more likely we are to create awesome killer connections between really disparate things. Be a method actor. This is about empathy. As planners, it's about taking a really long walk in the shoes of the people that your brand is trying to reach, to have intimate knowledge of what it's like to be whoever it is that you're trying to talk to live it and be it. That's the best way to get there. And 3, be a maker. As planners, we often relegate creativity to the creative department. But in fact, if we're going to really test drive some of the excellent, crazy mix-up mashups we've come up with, the best thing to do is to be out there piloting, prototyping, pitching to media, coding, whatever it is. But we should be making things just as often to show that those, that almost as proof of concept, whatever the crazy mashup is. So here is one example of those 3 things in action for me from a while ago. So it's 2011, and Walmart is in a massive pickle sales-wise. We've just come out of the Great Recession, and they have a strong need to basically reconnect with a lot of shoppers that they lost during the recession, and they've recalibrated. So these people absolutely lived on the edge during more prosperous times, and so the recession really, really brought them to their knees in sort of a bad way. Things were tight financially, and there was absolutely no safety net out there. And this is actually the strategic insight that our creative director wanted to use, no safety net. We could have written a brief off of this. We had enough, we could have gone for it. We would have had work that was sort of sad and pull yourself up by the bootstraps and all about price. But instead, 2 junior planner, well actually my junior planner and myself, we decided to go out and live with Walmart families up and down the Mid-Atlantic and the South for 2 weeks. So I went out, and I mostly did Texas, because that's where I'm from, and I slept on the couches and the floors of Walmart shoppers. I ate with them, I shopped with them, I played with their kids, I walked with them to school, I woke up with the roosters and the dogs and one woman's daily 5 a.m. trailer park routine. I lived with them. And it was weird and wacky, and I think what I expected most of all going into this is it was going to be terribly sad. It was going to be heartbreaking and terrible. And there were moments of that. But for the most part, this is the most fun I have ever had at work, ever. These people embraced life, especially family life, and all of its weird, messy, freak flag kind of glory, and had a great time, Toddlers put weird things in their mouths. Teens snuck out and said what Dad said last night. Like, Dad's MacGyvered crazy solutions. These people might not have been rich, but they were absolutely rich in a different way, and that was their stories, and it was wonderful. And so one of the things that we realized early on was that a lot of these stories were happening around everyday items from Walmart, right? Toilet paper, anything you could get there. But what really started getting to us was sort of these ingenious off-label ways some of those everyday items were being used. And so this got us talking about looking into people's shopping carts. Have you ever looked into somebody's shopping cart at Walmart? Peanut butter, a pregnancy test, and a tire iron. Like, what is going on at your house this week? What is happening? So we love this idea because it's like a riddle, you know, and it gave us a chance to basically connect our insight to all the stuff that was being sold at Walmart at their everyday low prices, and then the unexpected role that those things were playing in people's lives. And it also gave us the bandwidth for the first time for Walmart to actually get real about what was happening in the lives of their customers. It wasn't a bouncy smiley face knocking down prices. It was actually a true storytelling platform. And so Walmart loved this idea. They thought it was cool, but they were really skeptical because they're a super efficient company, and they wanted to know, is there enough story out there to keep us going for a month, 5 months, a year? So in the spirit of making something, like I talked about earlier, planning and analytics got together and in about 48 hours put together a dashboard to basically harvest and cultivate stories from across the interwebs to prove to Walmart and the client that we could actually keep this going for a while. And it worked. And so that was the final piece of strategery that we needed to actually sell this idea and bring it to life. And so as we moved further into creative development, in the spirit of borrowing and stealing from culture, we helped our creative teams steal from two pretty popular things at the time, right? So we've sold a storytelling platform. So we looked to sort of the runaway success of Modern Family for how to talk about exaggerated truths, right? How to actually do those in an authentic way. When it came to price, how could we actually talk about everyday low prices when we knew that people were out there trying to game the system every time and get things for 20 cents or something like that. So these were the two places that we borrowed from culture. And so we ended up creating a very very TV-focused campaign called Every Cart Tells a Story. And it looked a little something like this.
Crisco, Blue Bonnet butter, Pam nonstick cooking spray, and a Stanley saw.
Did your brother have anything to do with this?
No. Yes.
Walmart has low prices every day on everything you need, backed by our Amex guarantee. Save money, live better. Walmart.
This campaign was a massive win for us. This was the first time Walmart won an award at Cannes. This also got them out of a massive pit they were in. So for the first time in 8 consecutive quarters of declining same-store sales, sales actually peaked. And then we kept this going for a little over a year, which is also breaking territory for Walmart, who tends to switch it up pretty frequently. So not a bad mashup indeed. The end. Come on, Cal.
Okay, this is the last presentation. This is Kyle. He's one of our digital strategists. It's a word which has different interpretations.
Yes.
And he's going to talk to you a little bit about what that might mean.
I'm glad that I wasn't a part of your Walmart secret shopper thing, because you just reminded me, I can't believe I'm telling this right now, but in high school, to buy beer, we would go to Walmart and go to the cat food section and empty out the cat food and put beer in it and go buy it. So,
where were you when we needed you?
That's cheating.
Yeah. So anyway.
For a minute you meant tins of cat food and you were pouring them.
Yeah.
I thought you probably mean the dry stuff.
Anyway, I'm Kyle. Before I get to this, really just quickly want to reiterate something that Nick said. But someone smart once told me, or maybe it was from a TED Talk or a fortune cookie or something, that within the ad agency, the creatives they're like the frustrated artists. And if that's true, if you buy into that, then I think that the strategists are like the frustrated entrepreneurs. And the thing about entrepreneurs is that we all make different types of things. And so, as Nick said, the point is, this is what works for me. What I'm about to talk about is just what works for me, but it's not the only answer. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to do this whole thing. Now, I have a Breaking Bad slide.
There's always...
And I'm wondering, because I sent Nick my slides, and then he added in this this page into his presentation about how it's the lazy strategist thing to do is just to try to make a Breaking Bad metaphor. But I have spent my time in the advertising industry sort of toiling between the two worlds of digital strategy and traditional planning. So I always tell people that I'm a digital strategist or a brand planner depending on which meeting I'm in. I've worked at smaller digital shops, I've worked at big integrated ad agencies, I've worked at startups in between. And I think this quote really sums up the trouble with digital in the ad agency world today. I don't know if there's any Breaking Bad fans in the room, but there's this great strategist out of BBH in New York named Julian Cole. You should follow him, he's great. And he said that digital strategy is to the advertising industry as Walt Jr. is to the plot of Breaking Bad. You know it's important, but you've got no goddamn idea why. And so I think that sums it up. Digital, as a word, as a discipline, can be a bit of a confusing word at big agencies, and especially in planning departments. It can mean so many different types of things. You can be referring to a technologist or a producer or a social media person or a futurist or a banner campaign or anything in between. And so there's not one word that I can think of in an ad agency that'll get you more funny looks than digital. And it can just be a bit confusing because of that. But it all boils down to this for me. You gotta, agencies, I really thought he made a noise. He might, if I click again, we'll see in a minute. But it's not about, in big agencies like this one, it isn't about trying to create good digital ideas. It's about trying to create good ideas for a world that has just gone digital. Everything that the big brands that we work on today, everything that we put out exists in this big digital world that is, even a TV campaign, even a billboard, those things are social and have social reach. I work primarily on Nissan. If we put out a TV ad that people hate, they will let us know on Twitter, and it becomes the most social thing that we've done in the past quarter. I speak from experience. Nope, no sound. Oh man, sorry about that. Anyway, but it's not just those agency people that are talking this way. The clients are starting to realize this as well. This is Mark Pritchard from P&G, and he got up at a digital marketing conference in Germany, and the first thing he said was, digital marketing is dead. Now it's just brand building. And if you think about it that way, if you buy into that, then because digital is just another way to build a brand, it's essential to be in the toolbox of the planner, of the strategist. So my approach to planning and a strategy has always just been simply, how do we use digital and the digital and social tools that we have to hack the process, the traditional planning process. So if this is what we do and how we take an idea from strategic development and the creative brief all the way through launching the thing and then analyzing it, how do we use digital to sort of hack this process the same way that ad agencies have hacked culture forever? And there's tons of different ways that shows up, but here are just a couple examples. So social gives us a really interesting way, more rocks to look under to find insights. So something like Urban Dictionary, or looking at genes through Instagram hashtags, or there's just more places to look for insights now with digital tools. Or when it comes to the client presentation, how can we use digital and technology to help build prototypes to actually help sell the idea? That's something we do on the Nissan business all the time, where instead of just showing a picture of the thing, let's actually show what it might look like in a prototype website or something like that. And then finally, when the campaign's live, I think the traditional mentality at an agency like this one is, you create this very, very high polished TV ad or something like it and put it out into the world and then move on to the next thing. But now we can think about day 2 and beyond of the campaign. So how does the campaign evolve over time? How are we making sure that we're building in enough flexibility so that we can change it and optimize it as we go? So just a really quick example. We have a car called the Nissan Versa Note. And this is sort of the line around it, and the idea was all about it's your door to more, meaning it's very versatile, it's got a nice trunk to fit a lot of stuff so that you can sort of do more of what you love in this car. So it was a campaign and a positioning all around passions. And so as the strategist, it's our job to figure out how we take that thought and introduce it to the world. And so we started to think about how that might exist in the world. And when we were thinking about passions, okay, if the car is all about passions, well then we started to think about, okay, where do people go to buy things that they're into? And there's really one place besides Walmart that you can go to buy everything. And I think that would be Amazon.com. And so, Nick also talked about how the space between where you learn about something and where you buy it is starting to shrink. And I think that's probably true in the world in general, but not so much in the car industry. because you still have to go to the dealership to buy a car. But we thought, wouldn't it be awesome if you could actually start the buying process on Amazon, where you buy all the rest of the stuff that you're into. So we partnered up with those guys to just give the car a product page, just like anything else on Amazon. And then we thought, okay, well, if we have that partnership, how do we actually get people to talk about it? Where do people talk about their passions? And not just online, but in the world. And so then there's a social platform called Reddit, as you know. It's organized around a bunch of different passions. And so this is where people who are really passionate about something, anything, go to talk about that passion. And so we sort of hatched this campaign where we paired the car up with Amazon, and then we used Reddit to promote it, and it really took off. And so I just want to show you a little campaign video, a wrap up about this thing.
Huge mystery. Amazon packages go viral online.
A giant Amazon box has got the world stumped on what is inside.
A Reddit user posted a picture Monday of an Amazon delivery box the size of a small storage unit. The speculation began immediately. Is it an HDMI cable, paper clips? Maybe the box is for a massive port. Even Jerry Seinfeld posted, wondering if it was real or fake.
And now, well, the internet is all fired up with one burning question. What's in the box?
It was the first induction. A small car from Nissan that needed a big introduction. Instead of only going here, people could buy the car here. It was the first program of its kind, and the car sold out in just 3 days. Now we had to deliver on our big idea.
And a lucky few got the special delivery of a lifetime.
Oversized Amazon boxes. Necessary? No, probably not. Entertaining? Yeah, the internet sure thinks so.
As the mystery of Amazon's big
In today's news, Nissan delivered a versatile one. Nissan Sonica, desvelado el misterio de
Vamos a interactuar con Amazon.
Very dramatic music. Yeah. So anyway, that I thought was an interesting example of sort of the worlds of digital and traditional coming together to not even, those silos don't even exist, because Amazon isn't a digital thing, it's just where we go to get our things, and Reddit isn't a digital place, it's just where we go to talk about our passions. So all these things sort of came together in a really interesting way. So that's it, thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. So, does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts, insults about any of the things you've seen? You're welcome to share them if you have. You don't have to ask me, you can ask any of these people. But I'm also open to taking.
I was going to ask, you mentioned something about the neophile part of it.
Yes.
How companies are jumping on new mediums too quickly. Do you think that it's worse if they didn't do it and being absent, or doing it and then?
I think that's a great question. I don't think it's that they're doing it too quickly. I think they're doing it without understanding why they're there. So I think it's great for brands to embrace new platforms, but I think they need to figure out what they stand for and why they'd be on a platform. And I think the way that, if you think about how platforms are evolving and expanding, it's going to be very difficult for every brand to be on every platform. And so I think the key is to understand what each one delivers, who's going there, what you get out of it, and why it's a good place for you to be. So I'm not saying don't jump on them, but just figure out what you're going to do when you get there. Hello.
Hi, this question is for Jen. Based on what you said about how nothing comes from nothing, what are some best-of-class brands that you like to sort of keep your eye on that inspire you and what you work on?
Ooh, that's a good one. So, this is mostly... This might be mostly on my mind because I had some friends in from Minneapolis over the weekend, but I think Target right now is also related to Walmart, but they are doing an absolutely excellent job of keeping up with what is hot in design and fashion and, you know, top of mind for holiday, and they're doing an excellent job of doing something that usually takes a full year to do, right? Bring a microwave teapot to to the store really quickly. So I think they're doing a nice job of doing sort of lots of interesting mashups and picking and choosing. The shops at Target 2 years ago was another great example of that. God, I don't know. I'm going to get back to you in 5 minutes on that one. That's a good question, though. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello.
A lot of what you guys are talking about is staying on top of pop culture
Mm-hmm.
and being relevant right now. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how you're doing that, where you're looking to find out what exactly is going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think in one way it's easier than it's ever been because so much of it is right out there and you can kind of look at anybody's interests, passions, communities or whatever, and at the same time that makes it kind of harder because everyone else has the same access. So, you know, 20 years ago if you wanted to find out about people you basically had to go and visit them and talk to them, and it was a certain amount of work, but when you got to that conversation you brought back really valuable things. So historically there were, I think, a lot more focus groups, a lot more ethnographic trips, really kind of really kind of physical ways of going out and finding people, and it took time and it often took money, and it's quite effective. And now I think you can just go anywhere where people are talking or behaving about a certain thing and get a basic understanding. So I mean, we do things like with Gatorade, we follow the top 100 high school athletes, just their tweets and their Instagram, just to get a sense of what their daily lives are like. For something like denim, we'd look at who are the experts who are actually commenting on denim trends. So I think it's all out there, and the first place I think we'd go with any project would be online and within kind of passion communities, within experts. I think the challenge with that is that everyone else is doing the same thing. So to my point of kind of making strange connections, I think the challenge is where are you going to get an insight about people, about a community, about a part of culture that is going to shine a different light on it. We were recently doing some work with a bank, and they said that they were all about guidance. Their whole job was about how do you help people navigate financial challenges and through times. And obviously we talked to financial experts, but we also talked to some relationship experts because we wanted to understand how people got on with each other, to think about how a brand might get on with each other. And we also talked to a mountain guide. And when you talk to a mountain guide, it's really interesting because they basically are paid to look after people who aren't very good at things. And they say that their job is to, you know, go forward and let the people behind them kind of put their feet where they've gone. And they have to figure out things like, where do they want to go, the climber? How capable are they of doing it? And most guys will say, oh yeah, I can do this, and turn out to be not nearly as good as they think they're going to be able to be. And how do you behave when things don't turn out as they should do? So when the weather comes in or the fog comes in. And we found that conversation with the mountain guide the best piece of advice about how to think about navigating the financial world. What I don't think we should be doing is staying in our desks the whole time. So sometime, however, you have to figure out ways of getting out in the world, of talking to people and kind of bringing in surprising connections.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
I want to account for that financial institution, so I know what you're talking about for conversations. When a brand approaches you, how do you know whether you should be saying something different or you should say the same thing that competitors are saying but differently? And do you start the research by kind of looking at the competitive landscape or looking at the target and what they do and what they're looking for?
I think both. I mean, I think you learn things from looking at people and you learn things from looking at competitors. And again, as I hope some of this pointed out, there's never one right way of doing things. What you have is a bunch of choices and all of them are going to get you somewhere. And hopefully, as a strategist and as kind of creative teams, you make choices about which ones are most helpful. So I think you can do wonderful work by looking at what your competitors are doing and deciding how you're going to do something that plays off it or contradicts it or is just so different that it feels like you're in a different space. And I think you can behave without thinking about your competitors at all. Nike is a very good example. They never care about what any other athletic brand is doing. They do everything motivated by what they believe in terms of sport, and they always talk about the fact that they're the voice of the athlete. So all they're interested in is what do athletes think about sport and how do we connect with them. So I don't think there's an answer. Thank you. Hello.
Hi. I had a question. So when you're using Twitter and social media, I know that a lot of brands like to have data to support the insights you're going on. When you're using social media, do you have rules of thumb on how many Twitter feeds you're looking at to say this is actually an insight, or like how can you justify that that's basically the insight you're doing?
Do you want to take that, Larry?
Yeah, I'll take it. I think, again, I get asked that question in a variety of ways a lot, where people are like, so what's the threshold of followers of someone we should respond to? What should their clout score be? And how do you kind of compile that? And there's not one right answer. I think it's looking...
There's never one right answer.
It's true, but I think it's just looking at the volume of all the picture, right? Because I think in social influences, I mean, it's kind of a bullshit term to begin with. So I think if you can do research without Twitter just being in a vacuum, where you understand how social perceives it more broadly, it gives you a more full picture. That way you're not dependent on any one platform or any one person to kind of determine a whole insight. I think if it's supported in lots of different channels, then you're onto something.
Hey.
So you talk a lot about storytelling and how, you have data, but you need to be able to weave that story. How, I guess, from a more broad perspective, how did you hone in on your storytelling skills, or do you have any tips or tricks that, kind of, I know it's going to be different for everyone, but...
I mean, I read lots of books for my whole life. That's what I studied in terms of like college and everything. And that was a surprising thing to me, is that I did quite a kind of academic course, right? And ended up in a very stupid industry where the difference between a 30-second ad and Shakespeare's complete works is quite a lot. But nevertheless, there are things that you learn from one form that come into another. And again, I think, like people have said here, Larry learned his skills from kind of a film background. Mine was much more kind of print-based. I think you bring the story skills that you have with you. I think if you've never read anything, watched a film, gone to the theatre, you probably have some trouble. Hey.
When you're developing a strategy, how do you weigh the expected outcome that that you think people will have, versus their actual one? So I feel like I don't know, maybe sometimes we tend to think that people act in very rational ways. When
right.
In fact, it's the opposite, and so I don't know. How does that?
So do you mean how do you check your strategy in terms of what you think you should have done versus how it plays out in the world? I mean, you see how it works a lot of the time. I think the difference now between 20 years ago is that you get that feedback much more quickly. So the way campaigns used to work is you put stuff out in the world and then you did some research after it, and maybe in 3 months' time you looked at sales to see if there was any effect, and it had this kind of linear time. So maybe in 6 months' time you tried to react to how you've done things. What happens now is that I think much more quickly you can figure out if things are working and if they're not. And as Kyle said, when you're thinking about campaigns out in the world, it's not about launching them and hoping that they'll do something. It's about putting something out there and figuring out how, when it's out there and people are responding to it, what you can tweak, what's working, what needs to leave. And I think it's a lot more dynamic. Things very rarely work out as you intend them to, though. That's probably the one thing that you can be sure of.
You spoke about the difference between being a generalist and a specialist, not only in skills, but in the industries you're comfortable with. How do you kind of find the balance between being too general and not having a specialization and being too specialized?
I think what tends to happen is that people have specialisms and either continue to pursue them, which is great. I mean, you need people who are really, really good at certain things, and other people kind of grow beyond them and learn other things. I don't think there's such a thing as a total generalist who just has the same ability at everything. I think we all have centers of gravity, and what tends to happen is that some of us expand beyond them. But again, I think there's a role, and you're going to hear this a lot because it's the truth, right? Is that there's a role for both types, and probably on each account, on each piece of work, the balance between generalism and specialism is going to change. You certainly need people who get how all the different capabilities fit together, and you also need people who don't care about anything else except the thing that they're really good at, and they're going to do that to the best of their ability. What you don't want is just a bunch of generalists or just a bunch of specialists. Unless you're making one very small thing, then it's fine to have specialists. Hey.
So how does this, I can see how it translates to the creative side of the business. How do you guys interact and influence the media side of the business? So the ad placement, that traditional media planning process.
Yeah, I mean, I see kind of so there might be all these different kind of titles, but the way that work happens here is very much a flow between all of them. I mean, I'd very much see media part of strategy in that in order to understand people, you need to understand what they're reading, watching, when they're doing it, where they're doing it, and all that. So I'd see it as an input. I'd also see them as a part of the creative, because understanding where stuff goes, partnerships you can have, is very much a kind of creative play. But what tends to happen is conversations. So you'll have some starter thoughts, you'll talk to creatives, you'll talk to people in media, and it's much more about a flow of ideas back and forth that hopefully gets to something that works rather than something that's handed over. And again, we're quite lucky here because we've got OMD in the building, so we, on a lot of the accounts, the media people we work with are here as well.
Sure. And if strategists or account planners are those are frustrated entrepreneurs, and creative people are frustrated artists, what are media planners?
Media moguls, frustrated media moguls, Ted Turners, you know.
I have something to add to that. The line, I think, between creativity, the creative side and the media side is blurred. Right? Something like BuzzFeed, for example, is technically a media buy, I guess, but it's also a very creative media buy. So it's like the line between those two things is getting very, very blurred. So they're come from both sides. Yeah.
And then in terms of social media, I have my team, one of the things I tell them is they need to absolutely be up to date on every media product that's available on every platform, because if you don't know how fans are seeing the ads for this, then what are you going to write against? It's so important because it's a huge part of, I think it's social, and then more broadly of just having an understanding of the entire ecosystem. It makes everything that much more effective.
All right, I heard two more questions.
You go first.
Oh, okay.
Okay, quick question. When you guys are being briefed by the client,
yeah,
and you're taking in all the information, how much time do you spend on really defining the business problem versus start going into what's going on in culture, what's going on in the competitive landscape? I mean, do you really dedicate or emphasize that more here when you guys work with your clients?
Again, I think it works. There are different types of briefs, but we'll always know something that our client is trying to do. And sometimes they'll be very, very business oriented, right? So to introduce a new product and get a certain number of sales, to switch people between one area to another, to get new audiences in. I mean, quite often they're going to have very clear targets. Other times they want something that feels more like an overall brand effect. So they're not linking it to a particular product, but they feel that there'll be a overall effect. So for example, with Johnson & Johnson, who we work with here, we don't advertise any of their products, but we work with them on a corporate level. So we make stuff that we hope will help people think more favourably about Johnson & Johnson overall, and that will affect individual product lines. But most of the time, we're going to have on the brief, this is what our client wants to achieve. This is either a sales target or a behavioural change, and we need to make sure that any work that we come up with kind of feeds back into that. Final question?
Yeah, I was going to ask Larry if there was a certain protocol that you guys have for dealing with like a disastrous
Didn't you see how US Airways do it? We've got those prepared for every client.
I think, so part of what I did in PR was crisis management. So super fortunate to understand, again, the principles of it, but then plan for contingency. So I guess to answer your question, yes. Work on a lot of automotive brands. Again, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but we have kind of protocols in place of, okay, who do we need to speak to craft this message? Who do we need to get approval on right away? And how can we respond really quickly? Because I think that's happening across social media, right? There's a lot of, whether it's PR agencies or kind of branding agencies or advertising agencies, everyone wants to get into social, but I think PR is actually taking a big chunk of that in terms of crisis response and management. But that's something that I think I see across all ad agencies trying to get better about, because social media disasters, they will happen. I was live tweeting LeBron's The Decision, so that was like a nightmare for me. So I think it's kind of just a fact of life now. You'd be surprised. I think most brands across every category have a contingency in place that you work closely with PR on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for coming and staying late. I want to thank Nick, Larry, and Jen, and Audrey, who helped set this all up, and everybody else behind the scenes who helped you put everything together.
And Kyle.
Kyle's not here. It's not we have flyers out there. There's still some desserts out there. Take something to drink on your way out, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thanks very much. Really good. Thank you.